You've seen the portraits. Read the simplified stories about England's most notorious monarch. But prepare yourself for the brutal truth about Henry VIII that historians have sanitized for centuries. This wasn't just a king with marriage problems. This was a walking catastrophe whose physical decay matched his moral corruption. A ruler whose bloated corpse literally burst open during his own funeral. The sanitized version talks about a powerful Tudor king who changed England's religious landscape. The reality? A decomposing tyrant whose festering body horrified everyone around him, whose cruelty knew no bounds, and whose death was so disgusting it traumatized an entire generation of royal servants. Modern medical analysis suggests Henry suffered from severe diabetes, complicated by what we now recognize as osteomyelitis, a bone infection that literally rotted his legs from the inside out. The man who claimed divine authority couldn't control his own bodily functions. Royal attendants carried special portable chairs, because Henry frequently couldn't make it across a room without soiling himself. But there's more. Getting close to those festering wounds was considered punishment duty. The lucky ones got to stand across the room holding perfumed cloths over their faces. This teenager faced a husband who retroactively changed England's laws to make her past relationships treasonous. Henry was so vindictive about marrying a non-virgin that he rewrote the legal code itself. But the mental games were worse than the eventual execution. This man perfected emotional warfare against the women unfortunate enough to marry him. That's how long he waited after Jane's funeral to begin courting again. Fighting back meant not just their own destruction, but their entire family's annihilation. That infamous jousting accident in 1536 didn't just knock him unconscious for 2 hours. It likely caused traumatic brain injury that fundamentally altered his personality from ambitious young monarch to psychotic killer. This man consumed approximately 5,000 calories daily, while being unable to walk more than a few steps. But quantity wasn't the strangest aspect of his dietary habits. His kitchen staff prepared over 800 different dishes every single day just to satisfy his household's demands. With Henry personally sampling dozens, he forced her to witness the execution of 5 men, including her own brother, who were tortured into confessing imaginary affairs with her. Every morsel required testing by multiple servants for poison, followed by a mandatory 30-minute waiting period to ensure the tasters didn't die from delayed-acting toxins. These meals became 4-hour spectacles where hundreds of courtiers watched their massive, rotting king slowly consume enough food to feed entire villages. She stood there knowing she would die next, watching innocent people murdered because of her husband's deranged fantasies. These are the horrifying details that will shatter every romanticized notion you've ever had about medieval royalty. The monster's physical collapse. He consumed massive quantities of swan meat, thinking it would make him graceful. Meanwhile, his diet of pure meat, sugar, and alcohol was literally killing him from the inside. He gorged on venison, believing it enhanced his hunting abilities. He devoured oysters by the bucket, convinced they would improve his performance with his wives. These were on minor wounds. They were gaping holes in his flesh that constantly drained pus and rotted tissue. The putrid odor emanating from these infections was so overpowering that courtiers would flee his presence, gagging and retching. Catherine of Aragon spent her final years imprisoned in drafty castles, forbidden from seeing her daughter Mary, while Henry spread malicious rumors about her mental stability. She died alone, possibly poisoned, still writing love letters to a husband who never bothered reading them. Palace records describe the stench as being detectable 3 chambers away from wherever the king happened to be stationed. When he wanted their marriage annulled, she agreed so enthusiastically that he spared her life. She essentially had to pretend their marriage was a joke and thank him for not murdering her. Let us begin with the most revolting aspect of Henry's later years. His body had become a living nightmare. By 1547, the king's waist circumference reached an astronomical 54 inches. His weight approached 400 pounds, and most men of his era barely reached 150. But the obesity was merely the beginning of his physical horror story. His legs were destroyed by massive weeping ulcers that never closed. The royal physicians were baffled and terrified. His Cushing syndrome explains the dramatic weight gain, the uncontrollable mood swings, and those horrific ulcers that refused to heal. Here's what really happened. Servants would draw lots to determine who had to dress the king each morning, the wives, victims of systematic terror. Everyone knows Henry executed 2 wives, but the psychological torture he inflicted goes beyond simple murder. Consider Anne Boleyn's final weeks. Henry didn't just decide to kill her, he orchestrated an elaborate psychological destruction campaign. Catherine Howard's treatment was even more sadistic. Henry's pattern was consistent: shower his wives with affection and gifts, then suddenly withdraw all warmth and threaten them with death. Anne of Cleves survived only because she was smart enough to play along with Henry's charade. Jane Seymour died giving birth to Henry's heir, and he was already planning his next marriage before her corpse cooled. 9 days. These women had 0 escape options. Divorce meant death. Fleeing meant execution for treason. Gluttony beyond comprehension. Henry's eating habits weren't just excessive, they were genuinely insane. Typical royal meal included entire roasted pigs, multiple whole chickens, various fish preparations, mountains of bread, and enough wine to intoxicate a small army. Henry believed certain foods possessed magical properties. His eating rituals were elaborate theatrical performances. Henry actually banned common foods like turnips and barley from his court. Not for health reasons, but because he considered them beneath royal dignity. A kingdom built on terror. Henry's paranoia transformed England into a surveillance state that would impress modern dictators. By his final years, every aspect of royal life had become a security nightmare for everyone involved. His sleeping arrangements resembled a military fortification: loaded crossbows beside his bed, multiple daggers under his pillow, and armed guards stationed inside his bedroom watching him sleep all night. He couldn't close his eyes without witnesses because he was convinced assassins were lurking everywhere. The palaces became honeycomb networks of secret passages, peepholes, and listening devices. Eating a simple meal required the coordination of dozens of people and took hours to complete safely. Henry could spy on his own courtiers and eavesdrop on private conversations. Henry would kill people for crimes they hadn't committed yet, sometimes because he dreamed they betrayed him, sometimes because someone suggested they might be disloyal in the future. But his paranoia went deeper. He created spy networks to watch his other spies, generating a web of surveillance where nobody knew who could be trusted. His final weeks were spent being carried around in a specially designed chair because walking was impossible. But here's the revolting detail. Chunks of rotting flesh would fall from his infected legs as servants moved him, requiring followers with cloths to clean up the decomposing pieces of King. They wrapped him in lead sheets and sealed him in multiple wooden containers, thinking this would contain the mess. Gases from Henry's decomposing body built up such pressure that the lead lining burst, splattering rotting royal remains throughout the hearse. The smell forced the funeral procession to halt, while servants cleaned up the mess with buckets. Food preparation became a military operation. Sealed kitchens, guarded cooking processes, multiple testers for salt, spices, and water. Henry's paranoia even extended to his own children. He had Princess Mary and Princess Elizabeth watched by informants, because he suspected them of plotting against him. The man who claimed divine right ended up as animal food on a country road. The stench was so overwhelming that even his physicians, accustomed to medieval medical horrors, had to leave the room to vomit. Multiple attempts were required just to get the king's remains underground and keep them there. Some claimed supernatural causes, but historians believe it was simply more gases escaping from his continuously decomposing corpse. A paranoid glutton who transformed one of Europe's most powerful kingdoms into his personal chamber of horrors. These were his own daughters, treated like enemy agents in their own home. Make sure to smash that like button if this deep dive into historical horror fascinated you. And don't forget to subscribe with notifications on, because we read just getting started with the most disturbing truths that academia desperately wants to keep buried. Drop a comment below telling me which horrific historical figure you want me to expose next. Trust me, there are plenty more monsters wearing crowns throughout history. Their stories will make Henry VIII look like a saint by comparison. Even death couldn't end his capacity for causing absolute chaos and revulsion. A cautionary tale about what happens when unlimited authority meets unlimited appetite and unlimited cruelty. The truly horrifying aspect was his preemptive executions. Death's final humiliation. Henry's death was so disgusting, it traumatized everyone involved. His death scene resembled a horror movie. His body had swollen to such grotesque proportions that his skin appeared stretched and shiny. Nobody wanted to get close enough to confirm he was actually dead. But the real nightmare began after death. Henry's corpse was so bloated with internal gases that his coffin required special reinforcement. During the funeral procession to Windsor Castle, the unthinkable happened. The coffin exploded. Dogs were seen licking Henry VIII's remains from the roadway. Even burial became a disaster. They had to dig an extra-wide grave to accommodate the massive coffin, but the ground kept collapsing under the weight. For years afterward, people reported strange noises and terrible odors emanating from Henry's tomb. Several servants who handled Henry's body died within weeks, possibly from infections contracted through contact with his rotting remains. The true legacy. This is the real Henry VIII, not the charismatic figure of popular culture, but a walking disaster whose physical decay matched his moral corruption. The most powerful man in England became prisoner to his own rotting body. His legacy isn't just the Church of England or his 6 marriages. It's a perfect example of how absolute power can transform a human being into something genuinely monstrous. The king who claimed to rule by divine right died as he lived, a grotesque spectacle that horrified everyone forced to witness it. What would you do if you woke up one morning to find that your entire body was covered in maggots? Let's imagine for a moment that this was happening to you right now. You feel the squirming of thousands of tiny creatures crawling across your flesh, burrowing into the pores of your skin, and then they start to enter your orifices, dropping down your throat, burrowing into your nostrils, and even laying eggs in your eyes. What would you do? Would you scream? Would you rip your clothes off and frantically try to scrape the maggots off of yourself? Or would you just lie there and cry? Well, if this was happening to you, you probably wouldn't have the time to make that decision because you'd probably already be dead. Believe it or not, this happened to a real king almost 800 years ago. His name was Edmund Custis, and his bizarre death has been making people squeamish ever since. So here's the story of the only king in history who was literally eaten alive by his own body. Edmund Custis's nightmare began with his biggest asset, his massive wealth. Edmund was the richest man in England, thanks to his father, King Henry II. When Henry died in 1189, he left the bulk of his estate to his youngest son, Richard, who had never been particularly close to his father. But Henry also stipulated in his will that until Richard came of age, his mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, would serve as regent over his estates. Unfortunately, Eleanor wasn't exactly a saint. She spent more money than she had, handing out her late husband's treasure to anyone who asked for it. So when she heard that Richard was being tutored for kingship, she grew angry. She sent him to live with a succession of uncaring nobles, and he received an education, but it wasn't much. If these shocking revelations about Henry VIII's true nature have left you questioning everything you thought you knew about royal history, then you're ready for even darker secrets that textbooks refuse to publish.